So why Star Wars? Well, it's fun. So I like to tell the story that Master Yoda was my first rabbi, and that he was the first to describe something that I understood to be spiritual truth for me. You know, I sort of struggled with a lot of the anthropomorphic imagery for God in the Bible and in the Siddur, but like listening to Yoda teach Luke Skywalker about the Force, that it's, you know, this energy field that binds the galaxy together, made me think more kind of expansively for the first time and beyond the concrete about what was really going on a deeper level. So the films are important to me for nostalgia reasons. I have lots of happy memories of staying home sick from school and just watching Star Wars all day and things like this. But also, like, they facilitated some spiritual growth for me. I seriously wrote an essay for one of my classes in rabbinical school about Yoda and comparing it to Art Green's theology. So these shiurim are kind of love letters. I have like secret aspirations to put them into a book one day. If I'm going to write a book, it's probably going to be this. And teaching the kind of commonalities and overlaps of Star Wars and Jewish learning is, you know, I do it because I care about both of them. And despite the fact that one is real and one is fantasy, and you can decide which one is which, they're both mythologies in a way. So they're frameworks for making meaning. And if one is already more familiar to you than the other, then you can sort of use that to get into the other one a little bit more. So in this section, I realize these shiurim kind of, there's kind of different categories. There's some where it's like, let's compare narratives. Like, let's sort of hold Star Wars as a text up next to some other text as a text. Like what I talked about Han Solo and Reish Lakish, or about you know, the different narratives in Torah, or about names in Torah, names in Star Wars. And then there's other ones, which this may be the first one, but I have a few more in mind, where it's sort of like, let's explore, oh, actually, no, the one about Han shot first. This is sort of like that one, where it's like, let's take a Jewish concept from halakha and imagine that it is, you know, active and present in the Star Wars universe, and sort of use a scene as an example to explore a halakhic idea a little bit deeper. So this session is called "That Little Droid is Going to Cause Me a Lot of Trouble," all about the mitzvah of returning lost objects. So first of all, did you know it's a mitzvah to return lost objects? Some people did, some people didn't. So hashevat, aveidah, literally the return of lost objects, is a mitzvah. We'll get into some of the parameters of that a little bit, but in this session, here's what I want to do. First, I want to talk about sort of putting halakha aside and mitzvot aside. What are some of the kind of social norms around finding lost objects? We'll do a quick kind of first thoughts. I want you to tell me the first things that pop in your head. Omer, if you want to play along with this, you totally can too. You always have some great thoughts.
Tell me, do you want to answer the question?
What?
You can if you want. I'm going to sort of give you a scenario, and you tell me what's the first thing that pops in your head. Okay. So you're walking around downtown Corvallis when you see a wallet lying on the ground. What do you do?
What?
You're walking around downtown Corvallis, imagine, and you see a wallet lying on the ground. What's the first thing that pops in your head? Oh, you open it up and look for the like a driver's license or something, an ID sign. Good. Yeah. What else? Oh yeah, maybe it's the person in front of you maybe just dropped. Good. Okay. What else, Omer?
Break it.
Break it? Like break it open and see if there's money inside?
No, break it.
Break the wallet. Interesting. Okay. What's that?
Oh no, someone's having.
Oh no, yeah, like somebody's really gonna miss this, right? Okay, good. Let's try another one. Richard and Sarah, we can hear you too. If you want to jump in at all, you're more than welcome. Imagine you're walking on a deserted beach. You're on the Oregon coast, and there's no one around for miles as far as you can see. And you're walking there, and you see a wallet lying on the ground. What's the first thing that crosses your mind? And is it any different from if it's downtown?
Not really. Probably a little harder to look up and see who it might have belonged to, but I would still just pick it up and probably look inside to see if there was ID.
Good, yeah. So Ezra's comment that like let's check for ID remains the same, but Lisa's like, oh, let's find the person right away. Maybe I can track them down right away. Yeah, you have to do some sort of intermediate step, like unless there's footprints leading from there somewhere else or something, I guess. You're gonna have to do some more work to track that person down, right? Do you think that does, like, in terms of deciding what to do with it though, like whether to pick it up or not, does that really, in both cases, you're gonna pick it up?
Yeah.
You think?
I will. Draft or anything. I mean,
Well, sure.
you know,
But wallet's pretty important, right? Like, that's gonna be a real big bummer to somebody. And, you know, potentially value, depending on what's inside, it could be money inside.
Credit card.
Yeah, right, good. Okay, now imagine you are hiking. You're up on a mountain trail and you see, not a wallet, but just like a $20 bill. Hike in the mountains, you see a $20 bill. What do you think? What are you gonna do?
Take it back to its owner.
Take it back to its owner? How might you do that, Omi?
Huh?
How could you even figure out who the owner is?
Well, if I was a grown-up and actually saw that, I would probably look it up.
Oh, like if you, yeah, sure, maybe you passed someone else on the trail earlier. You could maybe try to find them, yeah, but let's say there's no one else around. What goes through your mind?
Walking downtown, and I was walking downtown, there was like $12, I mean, not 20, but you know, sort of a fistful of bills. And I picked it up and ran to the person who was ahead of me in the car. You stop this, and they said no, and I left it there, like very accusatory.
Interesting.
Like, well, interesting.
So Lisa was sharing an anecdote where she picked up a wad of bills downtown and tried to return it to like the person right in front of her. And they were like, no, it's not mine. And you ended up just leaving it there?
No, so they said no, it wasn't there,
Oh.
and they were
Like,
like.
why did you pick this up?
Oh, they sort of thought you should have left it there. Oh,
But
interesting.
what I did do with it is, it was winter, and I went and looked for somebody who might need it.
Oh, that's nice. So she took it and gave it to tzedakah. Sounds like gave it to somebody who might need it. Okay, so like if you're in the mountains, like what's the sort of thought process going through your head if you find a 20?
I just take it.
Yeah, probably. So I think that's pretty defensible, and I'm glad you're brave enough to say that, because even if, you know, how could you figure out who it belongs to? There's no one around, you know, there's no one, you know, possibly returned to. There's no way to like track them down, like with a wallet where there's an ID inside, right? Yeah, you might probably just take it. Yeah. Okay,
I kind of have a policy that I've had for a long time that if it wasn't possible to figure out who some, you know, money belonged to, I would always give it to tzedakah.
good.
Yeah,
Okay.
because I feel like that way, because I know it's not mine.
Right.
And that way, at least it's going to help other people. That may not the person who, you know, was its original owner, but at least someone.
I think that's a good way to be when you sort of luck into something. That's a good Jewish tradition. When something good happens, we give tzedakah, and when something bad happens, we give tzedakah. Also with food, we bring people food for both occasions. Okay, one more. Let's say services are happening right here in the sanctuary Beit, and you step out into the gallery for a moment, and out there you see a $20 bill.
No, that's different.
What do you do there?
I just take it.
You take, okay, so I think I want to actually entertain that. Omi, what's the difference in between finding a 20 up in the mountains versus finding it here at Beit? What's the difference? Up in the mountains versus at Beit? That's okay. Let him do his thing. And what do you think? Yeah.
There's nobody around.
Yeah, right. So the possibility of getting it back to the owner is essentially no. Whereas here at Beit, like,
So they're
it's services. So presumably there's people here, right? You could come in and say, you know, maybe at an appropriate time, say, I found $20 outside. It doesn't belong to somebody, and you could probably get it back to its owner, right? Could you take it? Maybe. I think that's, you know, if there's no way to know for sure who it belongs to, right? So, okay. So generally, I think, and here this is me sort of speculating about human nature a little bit. I think most people who are not thinking within the framework of halakha and hashevat aveidah as like a mitzvah, they have one or more of the following thoughts in some kind of order when they see something unattended or lost. First, they go, whose is this? Can I find the person and return the thing? How much effort is that going to take? there's sort of like an analysis of like, what's my investment here?
Mhm.
How valuable is it? Like, is it a 20 or is it a nickel, right? I think as a sub question in that is, do I want this thing? I kind of want $20. I don't really have a use for a nickel. Or, you know, or if it's, you know, let's say it's not even money, different objects have different, you know, values to me. There's probably some amount of like, do I want this? And then potentially there's the, can I get away with taking this thing, right? Which is, I'll admit, is kind of a cynical perspective, but like, I think there's an element of like, is anyone looking right now? Like, is anyone going to see me stoop down and pick up the wad of bills on the, you know, in on downtown and decide what to do with this, right? Is anyone going to know if I just go ahead and keep this thing for myself, right? And finders keepers is sort of usually, I think, the MO for most folks in terms of social norms around finding lost objects. It's like, yeah, maybe on some level this thing is just, this ought to be mine. I found it, it's rightfully mine. I think most folks want to do the right thing. Like I have a positive view of human nature, and I think most folks are also like a little bit greedy and a little bit lazy sometimes, and sometimes that's part of the calculus too. I think most people do this kind of instinctive evaluation of like taking into account a bunch of different variables, the value, the importance, the likelihood of successfully returning it, you know, whether or not you're being supervised, and make a split decision on what to do. I think some percentage of folks also approach these questions from within a framework of obligation and say, okay, what's my duty here? And I think a sub percentage of those, very few really, unless they've studied the halakha of hashevat and aveidah, take like a systematic approach and try to really evaluate all the factors and decide, use that to inform you know, their behavior. So we're going to launch 2 consecutive scenes from Star Wars: A New Hope, in which Luke Skywalker, under the auspices of his uncle Owen, acquires and gets acquainted with two droids, C-3PO and R2D2. Before we do that, though, I gotta ask, we've got to sort of ask an important question, which I don't think we're going to comprehensively answer, which is, are droids objects? Like we've been talking about inanimate things, and droids are not quite that. We're not going to be able to answer that definitively, I don't think. Droids in Star Wars seem like they have some agency, right? They're also sometimes apparently indentured to various masters. Some of them maybe have feelings. Like it seems like they kind of, like none of this is ever like very explicitly laid out. Droids in Star Wars run the gamut from like fully developed characters like R2 and 3PO to like, I don't know if you remember, I don't know if we'll see it, that there's like a sort of garbage can looking guy, right? There's the little mouse droids that run around the Death Star. You know, I don't imagine the little mouse droid has any personality or feelings. I don't know, maybe. Why not, right?
Yeah.
We have no way of knowing. So for the purpose of this analysis, we're gonna basically treat them like objects without their own agency necessarily. Which I think, at least from Luke's initial perspective, they basically are. Like, when R2 and 3PO are acquired by the large family, as we'll see, like Uncle Owen, it seems like he basically hates droids, as you'll see. And Luke basically treats them as like, okay, you're the new hired help. Like, let's figure out how we can work together. But like, isn't really, and also sort of wants to unload his own baggage on them. But if you are interested in further pursuing that question, check out The Tragedy of Droids in Star Wars on YouTube. It's a really excellent video. Do you know what I'm talking about, Ezra? From Pop Culture Detective? Okay. Yeah. The Tragedy of Droids in Star Wars, that sort of explores this idea of the way droids are kind of human-like, and whether or not you think of them as human, there could be a lot of really gross human rights violations going on in the Star Wars universe. Depends what you think. Okay. Let's watch some Luke meet some droids. This will take just a second. That's there. It should be able to.
An interesting thing about finding money in Sport Malice is that we get a lot of people who work at the Daytime Drop-In Center who will bring us wads of cash and be like, can you find who this belongs to? And we're like, no, we have no.
All right, were you able to hear and see all that, Richard and Sarah? Was that good? All right, awesome. Okay. So when Luke first meets those droids, does he consider them lost?
No.
Why or why not? I guess is the question. Not really, right? Like the Jawas are pretty sketchy, but I don't think he really has any reason to believe that the sale's in bad faith. If we were to keep watching, one of the first things we see him say to his aunt and uncle over dinner is, "I think those droids are stolen." So he obviously gets that impression somehow, but I don't think he doesn't initially realize that these droids are in any way lost. But let's sort of break down the scene if we can. I think if I was to do this in more detail, more comprehensive way, I would put copies of the script of the scene in your hand, because I think there's some important lines, but hopefully you can help kind of piece this together. So how does Luke's impression of the droid's real origin come together? Like, what are some key lines or key elements of information that help him build this picture of who these droids are and where they came from?
Carbon scoring,
Okay, good, right. Yeah, what does he say about the carbon scoring?
like, looks like you've seen a lot of action.
Yeah, he infers they've been in some kind of blaster battle. Okay, good. So yeah, they're right. Okay, so that we know that. Yeah, good. What else?
The hologram.
Okay, good. So there's the message, right? It's the help me Obi-Wan Kenobi, you're my only hope, right? Which R2, you know, so like, what message? Like, that's just some old data, right? 3PO, do you remember what 3PO says about that? He says Leia was it doesn't name her. It says she was a passenger on our last voyage, a person of some importance. He never actually really gets to finish it, because Luke's like, oh yeah, play more of that. Like 3PO tries to explain the whole thing and nobody lets him. What else? What other details come out of the scene?
When he got a thing that was stopping, like that, like
The restraining bolts?
that was in him, it just turned off.
Oh, right, yeah, he takes the bolt out. Yeah, R2 like kind of, well, first R2 like comes right out and says like, I'm the property of Obi-Wan Kenobi, at least apparently that's what 3PO translates, a resident of these parts, right? But then, you know, then R2, he's like, oh, if you take the restraining bolt off, you know, he bamboozles him, right? The message immediately goes away, and, you know, okay, good, we have that. What about, right at the beginning, 3PO, or Luke's like, 3PO is like, you know, where are we? And Luke's like, we're at the farthest center from the bright center of the universe, the farthest spot from the bright center of the universe. 3PO is like, I'm not even sure which planet I'm on. What does that imply to Luke? The droid is not sure which planet I'm on. If I was to say, what planet is this, you guys? Where would you think I'm from? Not this planet, right? Good, okay, so probably he's come from somewhere else, which is, you know, bizarre. 3PO mentions the rebellion. He says, like, that's how we came to be in your service, if you take my meaning, sir. Which, I don't know, what does Luke think that means anyway? He never gets to finish his follow-up question. Also, side note, why does he call them boys? He's like, looks like you boys have seen a lot of action. Are those very obviously gendered male droids? I don't know. That's a whole other shiur about droid genders. Okay. Right, the message, and yeah, and R2 comes right out and says he's the property of Obi-Wan. Okay, so according to some of those social norms that we talked about around lost objects, what do we imagine like Luke is, what sort of processes are going on in his head right now? Whose is this? Apparently Obi-Wan Kenobi, whoever that is. Probably like, can I find that person and return this thing?
You don't think he's mostly like, who's that beautiful woman and where is she?
Okay, that's true. You're right. Clear, that is actually clearly what George Lucas wants us to think. He's over and over distracted by Princess Leia herself. Okay, let's assume he has the clarity to think about what do I do with these droids. He's like, okay, I don't know anyone named Obi-Wan, but I know another, Ben lives out beyond the Dune Sea. Like, I know another guy with that same last name. Maybe how much effort will it take to get it back? That's unclear. It sounds, he's like, out beyond, that sounds far, out beyond the Dune Sea, but I don't know, might not even be the right guy. Like, maybe he's doing some sort of calculation about, well, maybe, do I have time to go out there and find that guy, you know?
And like he's kind of be a justification, like. to
Sure.
Go do this, like.
Yeah.
That's gonna be harder. This guy's kind of a weirdo, like-
Yeah, the fact that he's kind of weirdo, yeah. Which I guess we're all gonna learn more about in the new Obi-Wan Kenobi series that's coming out, that just started yesterday.
Do you get the feeling that he's concerned about how the droids, I mean, as if they're not,
See if I can get this.
but,
Uh-huh.
beings, do you get the feeling that he's concerned about how they've been treated?
I don't,
You don't?
like, personally, but that's.
Like he's feeling compassion for them,
Yeah.
maybe.
I mean,
Maybe
I
not
guess
yet.
it was just the way he was touching them. I mean, it seemed like it shifted during the scene, like.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah, I mean, he's like helping 3PO get all cleaned up, and 3PO's like, oh, this smells so good, right? Yeah, kind of. I mean, he seems to have way more compassion than Owen does, who's like immediately hates 3PO.
I don't know if it's compassion. I think it's like changing your vacuum cleaner bag before you use it. It's not,
Yeah, I think right. I think that's the sort of dim way to read it too. Yeah.
Well, maybe there was something about the way he was touching them that seemed like he was relating to them rather
Yeah.
than that they were vacuum cleaners.
Wouldn't surprise me that we're sort of supposed to read Luke as compassionate and, you know, sort of to all creatures and things. So Luke's probably also thinking about, you know, how important are these things, right? You know, also unclear relative to the, you know, the monotony of moisture farming. This is pretty exciting, I guess. So he's probably thinking about that. Probably thinking about, do I want to keep these things? Like if they do actually belong to someone else, how am I motivated to try to justify keeping them? Like, yeah, I think he does. Like his uncle bought them. They need them for the farm. Like Luke's been placed in charge of them. He probably tried hard not to think of ways that he is probably, you know, obligated to return them. And, you know, if he is going to ask himself, like, can I get away with keeping these things? Like, this is where Luke's sense of duty comes in, right? The fact that he's at all, you know, interested in this, you know, as it happens, he gets bamboozled by R2, removing the straining bolt, allowing R2 to flee. So we never really get to find out what that sense of duty would have led Luke to actually do. He ends up going chasing R2 and bumping into Obi-Wan that way. Okay, Richard, Terry, I thought I saw you unmute for a second. Did you have something else you were gonna add there?
well, I mean, I'm thinking you're kind of imposing this halachic question on the scenes we just showed, but honestly,
That's like the whole point of the shiur, Terry.
no, I know, but I guess I'm saying the word imposing kind of like, maybe it's a little artificial because
Yeah, definitely.
I don't hear anything in Luke that tells me that he's actually thinking
like-
about them being separated from their
Yeah, I think you're right about that. I think you're right.
because I think the only time he really kind of came awake was when he heard the word rebellion.
Yeah,
I
totally.
think he's, you know, he wants out. He's obviously very excited by the idea of the rebellion. I think he just wants to know more about, you know, where they came from.
I think you're absolutely right that I am imposing this framework of lost object. And we said, like, he doesn't really think of them as lost to begin with. Like, eventually comes around to thinking that they're stolen, which is kind of like lost, but also not quite like lost.
I do kind of think the closest, and we haven't obviously watched this piece, but like the piece where they're talking at dinner, it's like, I think they're stolen. That's probably like the closest moment to like maybe we should do something.
Maybe we should do
about
something
this.
about this. Yeah, I think you're right too. Yeah.
So what would so this is a little bit different than finding $20 from the woods, right?
Yeah.
So this is something that you've already paid for, and then you have suspicions that the person who sold it to you is
Right.
didn't have it rightfully.
Right.
So what would be the
So if that's the case, we are leaving the realm of hashevat aveidah into the realm of, well, theft. I don't totally know, but probably you're obligated to go give it back. There is a question of what what sort of compensation you would be due there. If you paid for the thing and ended up returning it, like, are you due some value in return? I don't know. That's a whole other question. So I think for the sake of the argument today, we're going to assume that they are lost. Okay. So I think Sarah's right. I'm absolutely imposing this framework on top of it. I'm about to do that even harder. Let's talk about hashevat aveidah. Let's talk. We're gonna. So I shared that source source sheet link with the original Terry, and folks in here have a packet in front of them with some verses. Could would somebody mind reading source number 1? These 3 verses are basically the origin of this mitzvah of returning lost objects. Who wants to read? Lisa's got it, go.
Deuteronomy 22, 1-3.
Right.
If you see your fellow Israelite's ox or sheep gone astray, do not ignore it. You must take it back to your peer. If your fellow Israelite does not live near you, or you do not know the owner, you shall bring it home, and it shall remain with you until your peer claims it, and then you shall give it back. You shall do the same with that person's ass. You shall do the same with that person's garment, and you shall do the same with anything that your fellow Israelite loses and you find. You must not remain indifferent. All right.
So there are 2 mitzvot here, one positive, in other words, one do and one don't, one positive, one negative. So there's the positive command, hashevat tashivem, to surely take it back, to surely return the lost item to the person it belongs to. And there's also that one at the end, lo tuchal hitalem, you must not remain indifferent. You can't do nothing. Like doing nothing at all is transgressing a negative mitzvah, and also failing to do a positive one. Additionally, at stake, and I don't think anyone really needs to read source number 2 here, is the negative commandment, lo tignov, you shall not steal. What constitutes stealing? Anytime you take something that doesn't belong to you, right? It's like taking something that belongs to someone else. So, and of course that applies not only if you intentionally steal, but also even if you inappropriately take something that's not yours to take. That counts as stealing, right? So these are some interesting verses, and the rabbis really pick these apart. Is there something in here in these verses that seems kind of redundant to you?
Something that it does raise a question to me.
Yeah.
If you find a lost object and you must take it home with you until you find the owner,
Right.
can you use it?
Oh, good. So they go into that. We're not going to quite go that far today, but yeah, depending on the object, and especially they're talking about animals
Well,
too.
you have to at least take care of them, but
Good. So this definitely deals with animals, which is I assume would have been a fairly common thing to lose. Yeah, maybe you can use it for work in the meantime while you're holding on to it. Yeah, what about the cost of feed and keep that animal, right? The rabbis go into that. It turns out, yes, sometimes you can use the animal to work, and sometimes you can't, and whatever cost you're allowed to recoup. Sometimes what they suggest you do is you sell the thing and hold on to the value of that animal, because money doesn't depreciate, and then when the person comes to claim it, you give them the money. That's sort of 2 or 3 steps down the road from where we're going to actually go into the process of how do you actually go about getting it back. We're sort of at the initial decision point of do I have to return this or not? But you're absolutely right. Do you notice anything that sounds kind of redundant in here?
I guess for me, like the do not ignore it at the beginning, and then you must
Yeah.
not remain indifferent at the end.
Good, there's that. What is there? Can you mention any difference between ox and sheep? And then also it's like, oh, the same thing with a donkey.
I mean, maybe the value of that thing.
Yeah, I don't really understand. Yeah, yes, those are different values, but they're all animals.
But donkeys are, ox and sheep aren't.
It's not totally clear from here. The rabbis dig into this and say, okay, the Torah is never redundant. If it's teaching us these different things, it's for a reason, and they go and unpack all that. Again, not exactly what we're going to do today, but the garment too. The garment's also like, well, I guess it teaches us that inanimate objects also apply. We're not talking about just animals as well. The rabbis also unpack all of that. Okay. So there's a positive mitzvah to return a lost thing. There's a negative mitzvah not to do anything. And there's also the negative mitzvah of don't steal. So at the same time, stuff gets lost all the time. And you can imagine this being like all the more true in the ancient world, like neither Torah nor common sense would compel us to never ever keep what we find. So there's got to be a world, there's got to be some scenario where we can find things and keep them. The Hebrew word for that is hefker. Hefker means ownerless, a property available for anyone and all to take. You can either declare your stuff hefker, like the chametz that you have left over on Passover, you declare hefker. Like, this is not mine anymore, it belongs to nobody. You can do that. There's also like stuff you find, on a natural, there's all sorts of things that sort of belong to nobody. I mean, in this day and age where we've explored the entire planet, maybe that's less true. But in the ancient world, you can imagine that really being true. So the halacha that develops around aveidah or mitzvah, like losing and finding, allows for the possibility that maybe you do get to keep this thing. And also maybe you're going to be obligated to some degree to pursue returning it. So the topic is first treated in the second chapter of Mishnah Baba Metzia. So Baba Metzia is one tractate within the order called Nezikin, which is literally damages. It's like all sorts of tort law. And this is the second chapter. The chapter doesn't proceed like entirely systematically. I thought about approaching this sort of in a much more logical fashion, which is if we were to look at this in the codes, like Rambam, Paro, like that's more how we would get it. But I think it's kind of cool to go through it this little more scattershot way they do in the Mishnah. So we're going to sort of read these Mishnah organically and then take a step back and try to look at the more system-wide approach. Okay, so we're on source number 3. I think it's on your second page. This is the beginning of the second chapter of Mishnah Baba Metzia. Can I get a volunteer to read?
Sure.
Yeah, that's what's got it. Go for it.
Which are the found items that belong to the finder, and which ones must the finder announce? These are the found items which belong to the finder. If one found scattered fruit, scattered money, sheaves in the public domain, fig cakes, baker's bread, streams of fish, cuts of meat, wool, as it is from the country, bundles of flax and purple wool, these are the finders. These are the words of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yehuda says anything which has on it a change, one must announce. How so? If one found a cake with a clay shard in it or a sheaf with money within it. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says any merchandise one does not need to announce.
Okay, so like I said, not a totally systematic, logical entry point for this. Rabbi Meir opens the discussion with basically just a list of things that a finder can keep for themselves. Presumably not an exhaustive list. But just looking at this, I mean, first, what questions do you have about, like, let's look at that list. Like, what on there don't you understand?
Wool as it is from the country.
I think that means it's like unprocessed wool. It's just like the raw wool straight from the sheath, straight from the sheath. I don't totally know what purple wool is there. They're translating something that I would have to go look up to. But I think the point of those things, the wool and the flax and the purple wool, is like it's sort of unprocessed raw material.
Is a fig cake something that we should know about?
I think it's just a common treat.
Seems like coming that out is, I mean, that and bread, those kinds of food happen specifically seems interesting.
Yeah, because they seem different from the other things.
Yeah, some of these are food, some of these are money, some of these are sort of raw materials.
But then, I mean, like the first two could also be merchandise.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And there's something but there's also something that has a change.
Good, yeah.
Baker's bread is changed from just wheat.
Yeah, there does seem to be a little interaction with Rabbi Yehuda's statement too, right?
Although he's saying if a cake is found with a clay shard, which makes it seem like the cake is not
very
the thing
obviously
that's the change. The clay shard is the change in the cake.
Right. The shard doesn't belong there. The sheaf of wheat or whatever with money inside it, the money doesn't belong there. Right?
I mean, it seems like since it says like baker's bread, maybe they're talking about like these are things that maybe would have been purchased or like
Good.
would not
Good.
like this isn't bread that somebody baked at home.
Good. Yes. What might be the difference between baker's bread and the bread I would bake? I suck at baking. Superficial differences. Go.
somebody purchased it rather than made it.
No, I mean, like, if there was a loaf made by a baker and a loaf I made, what's the difference gonna be?
Professionals.
Yeah, this one's gonna be all pretty and, you know, probably perfectly round and uniform with nice little,
Maybe a
you know,
specific
pattern on the top, and mine's gonna be a lumpy mess, right? Like, they're gonna be visually different. Also, if the baker bakes 10 loaves and I bake 10 loaves, every one of those 10 loaves is gonna be identical, right? Where mine are gonna be a chaotic mess because that's like the baking. So in terms of trying to figure out what's the common thread in this list, what sort of commonalities do you think you can find? I think you're very much on the right track.
Well, I was thinking that it was unprocessed things, which is why baker's bread, I don't know what fig cake is.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's sort of the same kind of thing. Like it's like a little cake you would make like 1,000 of,
But those
and everyone's
things,
gonna be exactly the same.
those things are made or processed. But maybe
Yeah.
because they're exactly the same, there's
Right.
so many of them that they're all the same.
Yeah, so none of these are especially identifiable.
Yeah,
Like they're all pretty generic.
individual thing. They're not like a personal object.
Right, they're not like a personal thing, right? Like, what's the difference between my fig cake and your fig cake, Ann? Like, they're probably identical. If we were to put them next to each other and go, well, whose is whose? Oh. They're also pretty common, I think. They're also like pretty generic, mostly like kind of marketplace type of things.
So like if,
Yeah, other than money, some things that would be offered for sale.
Yeah, sure. And the same thing. If you pull $1 out of your wallet and I pull $1 out of my wallet, we're like, okay, who's whose? I don't know.
like if someone was going to claim these things,
Right.
how would you know that they were really
Good.
the person?
Yes.
Like
Is
there'd
that
be
what the change has to, sorry.
the change.
So if you put a clay shard in the cake, you've identified it because
Yeah.
I
Good.
know there's a clay shard in there. It's probably gonna be.
Good. Yes.
She
Good, good,
has
good.
money in it because the money was hidden in the sheet. Right.
Yeah, okay, so there's a lot going on here, right? So money hidden in the sheath probably means maybe someone wanted it to, they meant to put it there, right? Or they wanted to mark that sheath as theirs or something like that, right? Or that cake is, I don't know why you put a clay shard in there, but like, I guess that's one way you could mark it.
You know how sometimes they put,
Like
little,
decoration.
yeah, well, little markers on.
Right.
Well, in a
toothpick.
Yeah, like little cake toppers or something, yeah.
Or a little, you know, a little label saying this is what
Yeah.
cake is. But that would make it seem more for sale. rather
Sure.
than visualizing it, but-
Good, okay, so some of these things are like the fruit and the money. They're specifically keepable when they are scattered. What do you think the implication is here? Like, if you see scattered money, what do you think? How did it get that way?
It came from afar.
Yeah, somebody dropped it, right?
Yeah, didn't put it there.
It wasn't, right, delicately placed there, right? Same way with fruit, right? Which probably implies that, you know, that neatly stacked fruit you can't keep that, right? Scattered fruit only.
Walking by their stall.
Sure, right. Sheaves, presumably like of wheat, I guess, keepable in the public domain, presumably not keepable in a private domain, right? So location matters. It can telegraph something about possible ownership, where it is when you find it. We talked about baker's bread as opposed to homemade bread. And we talked about wool and flax, you know, presumably unrefined. I presume that, you know, preparing these things would impart some kind of uniqueness, which is basically Rabbi Yehuda's point that anything with a change in it, it's possible somebody marked it that way on purpose, or could at least say, this is my thing, here's exactly how it's marked, right? And I think it would also imply that the owner intends to use this material. If it's raw material, maybe they're not going to use it. Something that's already been refined in some way, they have intent to go and use that. What do you think announcing means?
Like, hey, is this anyone?
Yeah. Hey, is this anyone? Okay. And in your imagination, Esler, what would that look like if you were, you know, living in ancient Israel?
I mean, I guess just based on the sort of descriptions, I'm
Yeah.
picturing like a market, or
Uh-huh.
like a,
Yeah.
yeah, like a,
So maybe we're right where you are, just being like, hey, I
yeah,
found
literally like, hey, did anyone lose?
Good. Yeah.
But I guess if it was more like, this is, like around your, like settlement or village or whatever.
Right.
Whatever situation, maybe there would be a more
Sure.
specific way to
Like
do
a
that.
system, yeah.
There's-
Like maybe during announcements at the end of service.
During announcements at the end of the service, be like, we found $20 outside in the foyer, which is right, good. So this starts to cross over into the actual performance of the mitzvah, how you go about returning it, but, so yeah, it's possible you can physically track down the owner. Also, depending on the circumstances, it may be possible to make a public announcement that the item has been found. Halakha goes into this process at length. There apparently was they called it the claiming stone. There was a special stone in the town square. You would go and you would stand on top of the stone and be like, I found such and such.
There you go.
And there's prescribed amounts of time. Actually, if you turn all the way to the end, the very last Mishnah.
So if you lost something, you just go stand by this stone waiting for.
Right,
someone
it's
to-
sort of like the lost and found. Yeah, yeah. So how long must one announce that the object has been found? Until one's neighbors knew of it. This is Rabbi Meir again. Yehuda says though, for 3 pilgrimage festivals, and after the last festival, 7 more days, allowing that someone can go home 3 days, come back 3 more days, and then find you there on the next day, announcing that it's gone. So different opinions. The Gemara on this goes into detail and tries to. So Yehuda seems to think like you actually really have to go announce it for the better part of a year. The 3 festivals are Sukkot, Pesach, and Shavuot. So that's at minimum like what 7 or like 8 months or so.
Which means if you found this thing, you're hanging out.
Potentially.
You won't like.
Well, or is this like you're coming back every time the larger?
It's a good question. Do you have to stand there nonstop or just be there once a day? Like, right. It's a good question. The Mishnah doesn't go that far. The Mishnah doesn't go that far. Okay, so yeah, we won't quite get there. Let's read another Mishnah though. Let's see. I think Gams, is it your turn to read the second Mishnah, source number 4 there?
And these objects one is required to announce. If one found fruit in a vessel, or a vessel as is, money in a purse, or any purse as is, heaps of fruit, or heaps of money, 3 coins stacked one on top of another, sheaves in private property, or home-baked bread, shearings of wool bought from the artisan, jugs of wine or oil, these one must announce.
Good. So a lot here is what we expected, right? That if we think about the commonalities from this in this list, it's like, yeah, something about them implies ownership. The money is neatly in a purse, right? The fruit is in a heap, it's in a stack, like as if it's put there on purpose, right? The 3 coins are stacked as if put there on purpose. The sheaves are in somebody's property. The home-baked bread has, it's the weird shape that is my sort of random bread shape because I'm bad at baking. Right, the stuff has been processed, right? These are things that would be probably claimable if they were announced, right? Storage is apparently important. Were they placed inside something else for safekeeping? The arrangement's important. Were they stacked or arranged? We're getting at a term that the halakha calls simanim. A siman is a sign. It's an indication of ownership. The most obvious kind of thing is, I have my name written inside my underwear, right? It's like, I don't know, but like my son does, right? It's having your name on the thing is the most obvious thing, but it can also be some kind of mark, or like in the case of livestock, a brand, right? That's a siman. Less obvious, but still functional are the storage, the arrangement, other sort of distinctifying characteristics that someone can come and identify and say, like, that's my thing. It has this particular quirk about it. You've probably heard gone through a process like this before. Somebody at the big convention hall is like, a wallet has been found. If you can tell me how much money is in it, it's yours. That's a siman. Knowing how much money is in it, that's something only the real owner can know, right?
Maybe, we don't know.
Yeah, right, but in theory, that's, if there was say it's a billfold, there's no driver's license in it. If you can tell me how much money, then I know it's really yours, right? Because it's one of the only chances you have to get that back to somebody otherwise. Okay, let's read another Mishnah. We're on Mishnah 3, source 5. Richard or Sarah, would you want to read aloud? Whoever wants to. Go for it.
If one found behind a hedge or a fence a group of tied together fledglings, or in the pathways of fields, one should not touch them. If one found a vessel in a trash heap, If it was covered, one should not touch it. But if it was exposed, one should take and announce it. There's a lot. If one found an object in a stone pile or in an old wall, these belong to the finder. If one found an object in a new wall, from the middle of the wall to the outside, these belong to the finder, but from the middle of the wall to the inside, these belong to the owner of the house. If the house had been rented to others, then even something found within the house itself belongs to the finder. Is that the end or not?
Yeah, that's the end of that mission. So if we were coming up with a comprehensive code of Jewish law to lay everything out, I don't think this is how we would go about doing it. Talking about a group of tied together fledglings, that's not a common thing to see. But what's here is basically more examples of how the location, the arrangements of stuff can work as a siman, or can indicate the item is not actually lost at all. I think that the ones where it says don't touch it, it's because the thing's not lost. Somebody put it there, they're coming back for it, so leave that group of tied together fledglings, because it's behind a hedge or a fence. It means somebody put it there to hide so that, they'll come back and they're going to come back for it, right? Interestingly, a more crowded place, I think actually makes it more likely the item is lost, because it's unlikely someone would try to stash something in a heavily trafficked area, but would in a sort of out of the way place. Mishnah 4 is actually kind of more of the same. I'll just read that one out real quick. More about how location matters. So if you found an object inside of a shop, it belongs to the finder. Between the counter and the shopkeeper, these belong to the shopkeeper. So like, the shopkeeper is probably behind the counter. So if it's on their side of the counter, no one else goes back there. It's probably the shopkeeper's thing, right? So it belongs to them. If it's in front of the money changer, imagine the register on the other side of the room, it belongs to the finder because it's probably a patron, it's probably a customer who dropped it there who's no longer around. It's between the seat and the money changer. In other words, the seat where the money changer sits on their side of the register, that belongs to the money changer. It's probably likely no one else is going back to that side, right? The one who buys fruit from another, who sent fruit to another, and within them found coins, these belong to the finder. If they were tied together, one should take them and announce their finding. Sort of a reiteration of what we knew already about having us, it's something out of place in there, right? Okay. Let's read the fifth one. Finally gets us to the general rule. I think it's Richard's turn now. Richard's turn to read source 7, Mishnah 5.
Okay, if one found an object inside a shop.
Next one.
Oh, the next one, sorry.
Oh, he's reading these.
Okay, got it.
This is the fruit one?
No, this one.
Yeah.
There, even a garment.
Mm-hmm.
Even a garment is in the same general rule of all of these. Why did the Torah specify it? To compare to it, to say to you, just as a garment is special in that it has markings, and if lost, there are claimants for it, so too anything which has markings and has claimants for it, one must announce it.
Okay, so finally we get the general rule 5, Mishnayot in. You're obligated to return any lost item that is really lost, and also that has simanim, identifying marks, and tovim, claimants, people who would want to claim it. So the implication is, since it says both, if an item has only one or the other, you probably get to keep it. We've already covered what happens if there's no simanim, like, we find a random $20 bill, no way to know whose that is, you probably get to keep it. You can't do the mitzvah if, the owner's identity can't be established. And in fact, items with a simanim, are always announced. In other words, you have to try to return them unless there are no tovim, there are no claimants. So what would lead to no one wanting to claim a thing? The item is worthless. The minimum value that the rabbis knew was a peruta, which is basically the smallest value coin that you could purchase something with. So for us, it's probably like a quarter. You can still buy a gumball for a quarter, right? Maybe. Okay, then quarter is probably, anything less than that is essentially ownerless and you don't have to worry about it. Anything that has been intentionally abandoned would have no claimants because the owner would be like, no, or if the owner has given up on trying to get it back. And there's another term here called the yerush. Yerush means literally despair, specifically despair of recovering something that's yours, despair of property. So halakhically, a person's ownership of property ceases when it's apparent that they have made up their mind that the property will be out of their possession forever.
How do you know that?
How can this occur is the next thing right on my page, and so good. So it can happen verbally. A person can say out loud that they are giving up hope of recovery. It might sound like, oh, such a bummer that I lost my billfold.
No, I know, never fun.
If you hear that, if anyone else hears that, I've expressed my I've despaired of ever getting it back. I've declared that thing lost, right?
Even if you can easily identify the person that this was.
Potentially, yeah, even with C-money.
I mean, so if I find your billfold and it has your name in it, say 2 months later, and you say, oh, I've given up, I'll never see that again.
So actually it comes to that. I'll get to that. So yeah, so it can happen verbally. It can happen through action by abandoning a thing, basically stopping searching for it. Like if I'm hunting, as long as I'm hunting around for my billfold, I haven't given up on it. If I decide, you know what, that's it, I'm going home. That could be yerush also. Or like the halakha's example is a river. Like if I have logs and I'm floating down in the river and some get away and float down the river and I don't pursue them, I've given up on them. Those logs, there's yerush for those logs, and they're now hefker. They're ownerless and don't belong to anybody. You can go fishing out of the river and take them for yourself. Also, time. If a sufficiently long amount of time has passed, and this is obviously contextual, if it's like, a year later and you find my billfold finally, like I've probably given up on getting that back. I went and made other plans, adjusted my budget or whatever. So there's a good chance you could keep my bill at that point, even if, and actually, so yerush can be presumed, even if, basically, if most people would have despaired at that point, yerush is presumed. So like, say an item falls into the ocean. No one in their right mind is diving down to the bottom of the ocean to get it. If somehow that is recovered, like say it gets drenched up, the presumption is there was yerush for that item, because any ordinary person would have given up on it. In fact, so even if it's eventually recovered, and the owner says, yeah, that's my thing. No, it's not. You were presumed to have despaired over it, and now that made it hefker, and anyone who find it. Tough cookies is the rule. Yerush doesn't ultimately require an act on the part of the despairer, only an indication of their state of mind. If that makes sense. Again, this is a whole long section. We won't go too much more. Anne.
Does it talk at all about what if the person who lost it dies? Do you have any obligation
Yeah.
to give it to their heirs?
Yeah, you do. Yeah, potentially. It depends on the thing and the context a little bit, but yeah, potentially, yeah. There is a positive mitzvah to return it to a person's estate.
So you made a comment about worth, but from these examples, it doesn't seem like worth is a prominent part of, like, could be a very little, where you said, well, presumably.
Something worthless?
It wouldn't be a claimant if it wasn't worth much.
Oh.
But these don't.
Sorry, when I say there's no claim, it doesn't mean no one would want it. It means you can't find the person.
No, what you were saying,
Oh.
if it was of small value, you
Right.
could assume it wouldn't have a claimant, therefore.
Yeah, I
it
think
would
that's
be
right.
higher. But worth doesn't seem to play into the examples very much.
The examples seem like they would cost more than a quarter in like. if we're-
Yeah, right. I think they probably would. Like, I mean, I think a fig cake, I don't know how big a fig cake is. I imagine like a little cookie.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, maybe you would get for a quarter or something. Yeah, these are, I think they are all definitely things that, are not worthless.
Because
Right,
they're
but
like.
still, I mean, the difference between an ox and a loaf of bread. is
Good.
pretty huge.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, that's true. But I think the point is there's if you find a penny or something worth a penny, like you don't really have to worry about getting it back, even if it is marked with the person's sign, it's just like so worthless that they're not gonna the assumption is they're not going to spend looking for something
Right.
that small and worthless. And
The amount of effort to return an ox
Right.
is equal to the amount of effort to return a loaf.
it may well be.
Right.
It may well be, right? Depends, right, depends. So, yeah, anyway, the Gemara unpacks this whole chapter at length. There are about 4 or 5 more Mishnayot here, and it's way more complicated than you ever would have thought at first glance. This is actually really a fascinating interaction between property law and a positive obligation founded in kindness, just being a good person. It's really an interesting, meeting. Okay. Now we know more about hashevat aveidah. Let's think about Luke meeting those droids again. Okay. You missed this, Steph. We're assuming droids are objects. They're not like they clearly move around and they have some feelings and agency, but also kind of they don't. For the sake of this, they're just things. Okay. Let's try to think about how some of these concepts we've introduced might come into play. There's another complicating factor too that we're not going to worry about. We talked about the Jawas kind of stole them. Like Luke didn't actually find the droids, the Jawas did. We never actually see them take 3PO on board their sandcrawler, but we do witness them scrambling R2 with some sort of energy weapon, right? And basically abducting him. The Jawas are what the Mishnah would call listim. They are bandits. And so they're outside the framework of halakha. Like Luke's a good guy though, so it feels better to say like, okay, let's imagine what Luke would do if he was like a good yid, right? So just for practice though, let's say you're out wandering the deserts of Tatooine and you meet these 2 guys. We're gonna watch that scene where they're let's say you meet these guys. Okay. So based on what you now know about location mattering and the arrangement of found objects mattering and simanim, the distinctifying marks, and yarush, someone despairing of ownership. Say you bumped into these droids in the Tatooine desert, are you allowed to keep them? Or are you obligated to try to return them? What do you think? What are at least some things we should consider?
They can probably tell you where they belong.
Okay, so good, yes. That's true, they probably can, but remember, we're treating them like objects for the sake of it.
So that's a sign.
That's true. Okay, so you're right, they can tell you where they came from. Good. Let's, okay, so that's sort of the category of simanim, right? Like an indication of who owns them. It seems like the ultimate siman for a droid in the Star Wars universe is that restraining bolt, right? These droids don't have any. So I guess they can tell you who they belong to, but also I'm not sure there's any way to like prove that.
Wouldn't you think they'd have a serial?
Okay, you're right. I'm not enough of a nerd to know all the, what the deal with the droids is.
I mean,
Yeah,
if you think about it, they are the serial numbers, right?
They sort of are,
So
right? It's, yeah,
C-3PO
R2D2 and
is
C-3PO.
Oh, that's a
designation.
Right. Good. Okay, so you're
No,
right.
because
So
another C3 unit is not going to be C-3PO.
right.
It's his unique
Or
designation.
whatever. Right. Okay. Good. Okay. So the droids may have simanim. They may be able to say, yes, I belong to, and I think 3PO says like our last master was Captain Antilles or something like that. Yeah, so they may be able to say that, but that's not the only thing that matters, is it? What other things would we consider?
I mean, if we found them and we saw the crashed remains of their vessel,
Good.
that seems like it would be a despairing of ever finding the thing moment.
So they obviously came from space, right? Because they landed in the desert in a crashed escape pod. Is plummeting to the surface of a desert planet like falling into the ocean? Because remember, stuff that falls in the ocean, immediate Yahush. If your droid crashed on a planet below, is that Yahush?
I think.
Can we presume? I don't know. This is we're having fun discussing Star Wars now.
Maybe it depends on is it common knowledge that mostly a droid's not going to survive this, or is it?
even where a plane crashes, whereas you can't tell like where.
Something falls in.
Sure, right. Yeah, it seems like the Empire is able to track them down.
Yeah.
So it may be possible. So this is right. So it's possible we can pursue the Yahush, but maybe not. Maybe not. Like the Empire is not giving up at least. Good. Okay.
They're also, in the middle of nowhere. Which
Good.
Many of these examples would say,
Uh-huh.
if you find something out in the desert.
Right. Does that make it likely that someone stashed it there?
Yeah.
Did someone stash these droids there and they're coming back for them? No, probably not. Right. No one would intentionally stash their droids in the middle of an open desert. Good.
But they are worth something.
They are worth something. I think we can agree that they're worth more than a Peruta.
But if you found some, and again, it's like, it's an escape pod, so then if you found them and all you had was Droids escape pod.
Right.
Like, you might assume that that escape pod came from a ship that had some problems, is maybe not.
Sure.
like,
Right. Yeah.
Not looking for them, because it's.
Oh, here's my other question. We're talking about 3PO and R2 in the desert. No one would have stashed them there. Maybe their owners have given up on them. Even though we may be able to establish who the owner is. Here's a thought I had. Does the arrangement matter? Remember, they split up and go different ways. Are two droids together different from a droid alone?
Are they
Like a droid alone seems like it's definitely lost. Two droids together seems like maybe there's like they're on a mission, or like they were sent together somehow. Like
And right, if the escape pod is still
sure,
there,
right.
right? Even if you saw one
Yeah.
and not the other, you
Yeah.
still know the escape pod.
Sure.
so.
Well, let's say the Jawas meet R2,
Yeah.
wandering through that canyon.
Yeah.
Maybe a lone droid counts as a lost droid. I don't know. The point is, and I don't know the answer to these questions. The point is, this is how you approach a situation from the framework of hashevat aveidah. Let's consider the situation from Luke's perspective again. So he ultimately comes to the conclusion like these droids were stolen. As we said, it's an area politics for another day. Let's just assume that they are lost for the sake of the battle. Going back to how his impression of these droids comes together, 3PO's like, I'm not even sure what planet I'm on, implies he's from some other planet. So is an object lost on an entirely different planet? Like Luke doesn't know about the crash escape pod, right? Is an object lost on an entirely different planet beyond hope of recovery? I mean, for me, yeah, but it's Star Wars, so maybe. People apparently like will fly their spaceship onto a planet, shut a whole world, and immediately land at the spaceport with the thing they're looking for. Because it's a movie.
So then maybe this is one of in the first, if your fellow Israelite does not live near you, or you do not know who he is, you shall bring it home and it shall remain with you until your peer claims it.
So maybe
you're gonna hang on to these droids, they're gonna work for their keep or whatever, and if someone does come and it's like, hey, those are my droids, then you're obligated to give the
so what we
back.
should have done is wait until the stormtroopers show up and then politely turn over the droids.
Yes, here you go, yes, these are obviously yours, except are their signs then different from the claimant?
Oh, right, yeah, good question, right? Probably, yeah, they would probably not.
And-
R2 would not appreciate it.
And if you could tell that they've been maltreated, you don't have to give them back.
Right. Well, sure, yeah. Okay, so if the droids are from another planet, and there we assume Yahush, that's actually kind of the end of the discussion. If they're beyond retrieval, then, but let's assume that it doesn't, just to see where this goes. So Luke notices the carbon scoring. It infers they've been in a blaster battle. What do we call that? Simanim, right? Distinctifying marks. Maybe the droids apparently come off assembly lines. Yes, they have different like numbers or whatever, but we need other R2 units. Mine is the one with blast marks all over it. That's a Siman, right? Yeah. So yeah, the true owner could identify, not just their make and model, but those signifying model marks. And then of course the message, the help me agree on Kobe, you're my only hope. This is definitely a Siman 2, right? Now, as far as I know, the halakha aveidah mitzvah, like losing and finding, doesn't cover a situation where an object's siman points not to its owner, but to someone else with potential knowledge of the true owner, right? So like, if anything, that's a siman of Leia, right? Because Leia, like if Leia made that message, she was the one in possession of R2. But they sort of interpreted it as being about Obi-Wan. Like I could see there being an obligation to actually track down Princess Leia here, as opposed to Obi-Wan.
So I'm wondering if maybe there is an obligation to return R2 and not 3PO.
Oh yeah, now we're talking. Because Luke doesn't actually know that they're a pair necessarily.
Right, because all we have is 3PO being, I've worked with that R2 unit before, he's in prime conditions.
Yeah.
You know, and that doesn't necessarily connect them as like a group. And I also think like 3PO is like,
write this down for the next time.
Like my previous, like our previous master was Captain Antilles, which implies that 3PO at least has assumed that that is no longer a connection, maybe because he knows that Captain Antilles is not.
I'm not sure we ever clear up who Captain Antilles is.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Okay.
I think he's probably dead, but
probably dead.
But
could have been one of those rebels on the cruiser.
Yeah, and also I'm going back to the blaster marks and wondering if like blaster mark, but then I'm like, okay, so this is the other side of this. Blaster marks on 3PO might be more of a Siman than on R2 because R2 is built to be in a little like pod on a fighter.
Right. He's an astronaut droid. He flies in the starfighters.
But blaster marks on 3PO is
protocol
like, he's a
droid,
protocol
not
droid.
designed for combat. That's like the shark. That's like the pot shard in the cake.
Right.
Yes.
So these are my two kind of thoughts.
Now you're thinking like a halafis. Yes. Yes. I just want us all to imagine also a scene where Luke is standing on a rock in the middle of Mos Eisley Spaceport, announcing that, you know, anyone looking, that I'm looking for a beautiful young woman in a white robe to come claim these two droids, right? Or, you know. So, and R2, you know, comes right out and says, like, I'm the property of Obi-Wan Kenobi, a resident of these parts. Like, once we get this far, there's definitely an obligation to do hashevat aveidah. And Luke knows a guy with the same last name, more or less where he lives. Like, the next step would then be deciding whether the appropriate course of action is to try to track him down or to stand on a rock in Mos Eisley or whatever. Awesome. This has been great. So the connection here to Star Wars is really obviously just for fun. I think hashevat aveidah, though, like the idea of treating something as mundane as a lost object, is really this interesting path into this way of thinking about the world and like what is my obligation to other people vis-a-vis property and stuff. You know, it's the kind of thing that's really done intuitively. Most people don't even think more in a second about it. But the interaction between property law and kindness to other people like opens up this whole world of possibilities and potentialities. And ultimately, that's what the Torah is about. Like, it's about not just dispassionate application of the law, but pursuit of justice, like getting everything in its right place. So I think learning about this and learning about the subjects is actually like a really good kind of mental conditioning. Like, what else are you going to think about in this sort of analytical way where I'm going to take into account all these different factors and weigh my decision for having gone through this process with hashevat aveidah. So if you align yourself with that mission of, you know, bringing justice to the freedom and justice to the galaxy, then I think maybe hashevat aveidah is for you. Thank you all so much. This has been super fun.